Hey, this is Clark with Pass the Baton, where we believe ministry is a relay, not a marathon. And today, the question is, how do you treat someone how do you take care of someone? How do you give the gospel to someone that doesn't want it? Now, what kind of made me thinking of this more recently is, as a nurse, normally I work in an operating room, but it's been so crazy with COVID and different things that I've actually been going to med-surg, to the CCU, to different places where I actually do patient care much differently than what you would do in an operating room. And I was reminded of the years gone past when I used to, work in med-surg, and from time to time you would have a patient who really didn't act like they wanted you to take care of them. Now, the first thought is, why are you here? And so you kind of wonder why someone would even come to receive help when they really don't want it. And sometimes people may get argumentative. They may literally refuse the care that you can give them. They may cuss you. Sometimes you may have to get security to come and help you. These are the kind of things that from time to time a nurse or healthcare provider actually does have to deal with. But you just think deep down, if you care for people, you're thinking, I just want to help you, but they won't let you. Now, in the scripture, we see a couple places that are somewhat like this, and the text I chose to read today is in the book of Matthew. And in Matthew, you get into chapter 10. Of course, this is one of the eyewitnesses of Jesus. This is the one who was a tax collector that Jesus literally chose, and he went to who was called Levi in one of the Gospels, and he's called Matthew. He's the same guy, but he was a tax collector, one who no doubt really appreciated Jesus and what he'd done for him. But as he's writing this, in chapter 10, he talks about the calling of the disciples, the 12, as he chose them. Then he gets to this. He says, and when you go, and he said, heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out devils. Then he says, freely you have received, freely give. Don't provide gold or silver or brass in your purses. And so he's basically saying, don't worry about it, I'll take care of you. But he also says, freely you have been given, freely give. It's almost as if he's saying, I'm sending you to heal, to do these things, to cleanse lepers, raise the dead, cast out devils, and don't charge anybody for it. Now, consider that. And listen, this is in no way a bash against ministry. I'm into ministry, but consider that these people were going from house to house, town to town, and they weren't charging anybody, but they were doing these things. Now, as just a small plug for Matthew, there are people out there that say, well, did Matthew really write it? There are skeptics that try to put you off that Matthew didn't even write this. Matthew is the one who includes, not only does he, see the other Gospels say, provide neither money. And Matthew puts it so distinct here. He says, don't provide gold or silver or brass. Now, this is the guy that dealt with money. This was the tax collector. And he wanted to say, it's not even just your money. It's don't even take gold or anything. And Matthew talks about money 4 times more than any other Gospels. Do you know why? Because he was a tax collector. He knew money. He knew about these sort of things. So he's talking about this, goes into it. He said, you do this stuff freely. And he said, you heal them, you're doing all these things. He said, don't even take 2 coats. Don't take your shoes and your staves. And then he says, and into whatsoever town, city, or town you enter, inquire who's worthy, and there abide till you go. And he said, and when you come out of the house, salute it. And it's just saying, be respectful of it. And if the house be worthy, let your peace come upon it. And if it's not worthy, don't let your peace come on it. It's almost as if he's saying, speak the truth, and just kind of speak it and get out. Let your peace be upon it. And it's somewhat kind of what he's saying. But then he goes into this and he says, and whosoever shall not receive you nor hear your words, when you depart out of that house or city, shake off the dust of your feet. Now, in our language, sometimes you may hear like wash your hands of it. And that's also a phrase that comes from the Bible, no doubt, when Pilate washed his hands of it. There's other little phrases that mean the same thing. But when you say shake the dust off your feet, it's coming from here. Now, this is also seen in the Old Testament. This has a picture of really, in this time, and even in the book of Mark, talking about this story, he refers to them literally wearing sandals, to take sandals with them. Here in Matthew, he doesn't mention that. But it has a picture of even when you see Jesus and he's with his disciples and he washes their feet. It was customary when you went to someone's house that the owner of the house, the person who was hosting you, would literally wash your feet. It was a sign of servanthood, but it was also a sign of hospitality. Because when you're walking in the desert, in the dry land, and you got dust all over your feet, it would be nice to have your feet clean before you walk in, not only for the person that owns the house, but for you and for your feet. And so it was kind of customary of that. But he says, listen, if they won't hear you, shake the dust off your feet. Now, consider what he's saying. Now, remember I started this with how do you help people that won't let you? Well, there comes a time when you just can't. You just have to just leave it. Now, think about this. When he talks about shaking the dust off your feet, when you're going from town to town, or if you're leaving the house and you're going to another house and you still have that dust on your feet, basically, in a sense, what he's saying is, don't track it to the next place. So thinking of it as a nurse, even when a patient literally cusses you when you're trying to help them, it affects you. It affects me now when I'm thinking about it. And by the time you go to the next room, someone who needs and will accept and wants your care, by that time you're so mad and you're infuriated and you act differently. And what Jesus is saying here is don't take that with you. Just when they're rude to you, just shake the dust off. Just leave it there and go on. We take so much energy, and even looking at it as a nurse, there are other people that would need my care instead of wasting my time. Now listen, don't get me wrong, if you're in the health field and you're listening to this, there's certain things that we have to do. But if I'm there for literally 2 hours just trying to get somebody to allow me to give their medications, then, to 6, 8, 10, however many other people I'm taking care of that day that needs me and will accept my care, they're not getting appropriate care because I'm spending 2 hours that should take 5 or 10 minutes because they do not want me there. Now, in health field, you may not be able to just shake the dust off and leave. But Jesus is saying here, you just shake the dust off, leave it there, and go on. Instead of wasting your time, you've done as much as you can to move on. But when they've been rude to you, don't take that anger to the next house. Don't take the rudeness to the next house because of how they treated you. You just forget that and you move on. Because when people don't want your help, they won't accept it. There comes a time when you say, okay, I'm just wiping the dust off my feet and I'm moving on. And then he goes even a little bit further. He says it should be, and it gets down to verse number 15, says it should be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah in that day than for that city. Now, pretty much anybody, whether they're Christian or not, whether they know a lot of Bible or not, they've heard what Sodom and Gomorrah is. And I want to say this in chapter 19. Literally, Lot, when they come into the city, the angels, the strangers that come into the cities, and literally, it says in chapter 19, Genesis, that Lot provided a basin for them to wash their feet. Now, I'm not saying that's all that it's saying here, but consider that Lot literally was going to let them wipe the dust off their feet. He was being hospitable. And there are some that would even argue that that's what the whole thing of Sodom and Gomorrah is. Now, Ezekiel 16 talks not only about, that sort of thing, but it also talks about the detestable things that they did, just using those words. So there's a lot more to it than just not being hospitable, and that's a whole other longer video that you'd have to get into to discuss that. But when he literally provided this basin for them to wash their feet, but then the townspeople come around and they took them out and wouldn't allow him. So at least in that city there was someone that was showing hospitality, someone that was willing to do something for them. So in some sense, maybe that's why he said it would be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah than for this city who didn't want anything. But you have to consider here that Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed completely. Fire and brimstone, nothing there. And when he says it could be more tolerable, at least maybe he would allow the city to go on. Obviously, because today we see that over and over again. People that don't want to hear the gospel, people go in there, they won't hear it. God doesn't destroy them. But he tells that evangelist, that preacher, that everyday worker, whoever it is that's trying to spread the gospel, he tells them, shake the dust off your feet and go on to the next place. Because there's other people out there that need it, that want it, and give it to them. Give it to someone that will accept it. Just shake the dust off your feet. Don't let the anger that you've incurred from this go with you. Just do what you need to do. Move on to the next place. And I truly believe this is what we need to do. It's hard to do, but it's a good thing to do. So remember to pass the baton. Remember to hit that subscribe button, whatever you need to do. But until next time.